very anarchistic, to the people, right? Power to the people. Right on.
We are the only ones that are going to save us.
Hey guys, it's your girl Anarchism, and today is a very full circle day for me and my friend Soul. This is something we've been wanting to do with each other for a while now, and as you can see, we'll be discussing anarchism and reproductive justice today. And in the spirit of autonomy, I am going to let Soul tell you more about what he does and all the work that they have done. But I just want to take this moment to say how much I really appreciate you being here today, being in conversation with me. It's really a privilege to just kind of give you more of a platform to talk about your ideas and your work. And you are someone these last few years I really appreciate, just the way you show up, the way you share resources with people. Thank you, Soul, for being here and talking with me today.
The feelings are so mutual. I'm really glad that we found each other on the internet, because I often find things I do not like and wish I saw less of.
Yes. No, and I feel like it's also special because you are someone that for the last few years has kind of watched me grow and evolve politically as well. So if there's anyone that knows, Soul knows. I'm telling y'all. But yeah, I wanted to start us off with a quote by Saidiya Hartman from Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiment. It is to acknowledge that we were never meant to survive, and yet we are still here. The entanglement of violence and sexuality, care and exploitation continues to define the meaning of being Black and female. When or what prompted you to start embracing anarchism or just anarchistic ideas in general?
So I think that I've been gravitating towards anarchism for a while. In preparing to be in conversation today, I was thinking a lot about where I'm from. So I'm from New Bedford, Massachusetts. I am not a proud Massachusettsian, so just make that clear. But my hometown, home city was really founded around the whaling industry when America was unfortunately getting started. But for a lot of formerly enslaved folks, they migrated there and wanted to be involved in the industry, really because they were then I'm on sea. I'm actually not even on land. I'm not in that way governed and basically just forced to coexist with folks who do not want to coexist with me, who simply wanted me here as labor and nothing else. And so I've just thought a lot about first, just statelessness, what it would mean to actually just exist separate from the society that I'm
all
born
of this.
into. Yeah. Just because I had a really, really hard time growing up in Massachusetts, it being very white, particularly white and liberal. I think those places, the racism that exists there is just, I think, another layer to it, because everything just gaslights you that it's not happening at all. No, it's here, it's happening.
It's happening, and I'm experiencing it.
Yeah, it's real. Reading these histories of enslaved folks, for this being a lot of folks' origin, really just brought me a lot of comfort growing up, and also just gave me, I think, the seeds of an alternative to the state kind of perspective. And so when I really formally kind of came to anarchism later, when I was doing a lot of mutual aid organizing when the pandemic had first started, which for context, I was living in New York by that point, which was just really, really wild, I think, in general, to be in a place where everybody's on top of each other and then there's an airborne virus. And so the mutual aid work that I was doing really just came from being cool, so we're all just going to be on top of each other with no governmental or structural support at all. Within that, there were just a lot of young people and kids in my community, and a lot of them were just talking about, okay, I get why I'm not at school, but my school was not just math, science, reading, whatever. A lot of kids were that's where I got my menstrual products. That's where I got my first aid. That's where I got, I don't know, my plan B. That's where that was kind of this place where all these other needs were being met. Food, being supervised, having an adult just watch me. And so I had ended up creating this network of folks who were redistributing menstrual products, plan B. I think we had pregnancy tests at one point, PPE, because a lot of people were there's no masks at the store.
Wow,
I'm seeing, obviously, that I should be, getting masks and sanitizer and Clorox wipes. They're not at the store, so where am I supposed to go? I would think there would be a more robust state response. I remember seeing different countries actually shutting down, and people here were we can't shut down. I need to be able to order McDonald's right now.
Right.
And I'm just y'all, it's live outside. It's really okay to not have a McFlurry right now. I fear
for real, fall down, bro.
I just was like, yeah, we basically just doing all this by ourselves. Like, what if this was like really intentional instead of it only being brought on by crisis as well? Like, I just was like, why can't this just be an interdependence that we healthily practice together anyway, instead of constantly being oriented in a way that's like begging the state to show up in these ways? Like, we're willing to do it, one, and we can do it in a lot of ways. Like, I definitely wouldn't have thought that would be work that I was doing when I first moved to New York. But then once I did it, I was like, we could just do this all the
Yeah.
time.
It's interesting how essentially, I think, especially like as Black folk looking back at our history, we've always carved out something for ourselves, especially because we are quite literally like outside of the social order just being Black, right? So this means having our own resources. This means finding ways to take care of each other because no one else was going to do it for us, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like the pandemic probably woke a lot of people up as well, because it's just like, here we are literally in the midst of crisis, and the state is saying, you know, it's more important to us that we just want to get back to normal as quick as possible. And we don't care what is lost in times of that. It's more because we need y'all to go to work. We need y'all to still be active participants in this thing, even though you're dying and your loved ones are being killed, right? And so it does leave it up to us to kind of protect each other, you know? And I feel like it's interesting because, you know, COVID never went anywhere. It's still here. Like, I will see people host these events, right? People that consider themselves to be radicals and organizers, just like, but then you don't have any type of mask mandate in place, which also means you are quite literally barring people from attending this community event because you won't even put on a mask. You know, it's like everyone's ready to fight fascists and pick up the gun, but it's just like, you know, you also could just put on a mask at this event as well to help protect those around you, a part of your community that are disabled, that are immunocompromised, and so on and so forth. It's like, I feel like sometimes people think of the ways we take care of each other. People tend to think like there's this big jump to just like physical defense. And yes, that is a part of it. But also when we are in a time of just like, when it comes to our health and our well-being, let's put on a mask to simply protect each other, you know? So based on what you've experienced and seen your work for these last years, I know you do a lot of work with the Adia Collective and the Transfuturist Collective. Okay, I got your resume down, you know what I'm saying? I know. He wouldn't talk about y'all, but I'm gonna talk about it, okay? Why do you feel like it's necessary for people to embrace anarchism when it comes to reproductive justice?
I think a lot of it is that, just like, for me, anarchism is for me like a tool to understand how power exists, and then also to then say, okay, like, understanding power in institutions in this new way, how do I resist them or opt out of them? Like, how do I reject this idea that everything that I do requires permission from some kind of state, law, institution, whatever it is, to quite literally just live a self-determined life? And so I'll just also share that I am a lawyer by training, and that work has looked very non-traditional because I just did not have an interest in, like, I don't know, defending Amazon for environmental catastrophe. Like, I don't know. That didn't appeal to me.
Not my calling.
Yeah. What kind of pushed me there was like my own experiences navigating just like systemic harm, but it also interpersonal harm, and being like, why aren't these systems giving relief for things like sexual violence, or when police profile, like, why isn't there any kind of recourse when you're telling me this is the only way to get recourse? Like, this administers justice. The state is supposed to meet not just like needs for like resolving conflict, if you can even call it that, but also like, if you can't afford food, you're supposed to go to the state. They're supposed to give you some kind of response. And we see all the time that that's just not true. And so I really wanted to understand that. Like, I think in a very like neurodivergent way, I was like, well, I'm going to read every single law that has ever existed, and then I'm going to understand what is going on, because I just was like, there's no way that this is all there is. And so for me, like, when it comes to reproductive justice, I think so much of that work is very like court centric and very focused on policy and legality. And I think that we've seen the consequences of that being the primary strategy, right? Like, the entire framework of reproductive justice is obviously a human rights framework, right? Which, understanding that it came forward in like 1994, that's like the end of South African apartheid. That's like really, to me, like, it makes sense in context, like, why this framework emerged that way. But I think the entire idea of rights then suggests that someone can give them to you, but also someone can take them away. And if that means they can be given and taken away, we're going to just constantly be appealing to this like moral conscience of a state that we know does not have one. And so it's a very fragile way to live. Like, to me, it means I can never actually get comfortable enough to make self-determined choices, because I always have to be thinking, okay, what happens if in 4 years this person takes office? Or what happens if
Right.
the Supreme Court is slanted this way for the next 50 years? What happens if this company gets away with this and they're in the lawsuit goes on for 20 years, which means that this company never has to be accountable for, I don't know, an oil spill, or
Right.
for these chemicals, going into the air of this community. Like I have to constantly think about things like that. And so for me, like, it's just put me in this place where I'm like, I get and respect the lineage of like where we've come from. And I think it also just like gives us space to be like, okay, what works and what doesn't work. And so to me, it just feels very, very clear that like if I'm really understanding reproductive justice, and I really believe in this idea of self-determination around not just people who don't want to have children, since I do a lot of abortion support work, but also for people who do and are like, I want my children to grow up and become adults, to become elders, to live, full lives.
Mhm.
I have to think more creatively than just this idea of, well, I can get them the right to do this. Like I can get them the state to say, fine, you can do that behavior, and start thinking about how can I just get the state to just not interfere at all. If that's not a place that we go, I think we're just going to always kind of be stuck in this like ping pong game with the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Some state is going to be like, I'm banning this. And people are going to be like, I'm suing because you shouldn't be able to do that. And then the Supreme Court
Right.
is either going to say, okay, you're right, people should be able to do this. Or they say, you're right, people shouldn't be able to do this. And then we have to wait for another case to go up to
Yeah.
overturn that. And I just am like, we just deserve more. Like, what if we just did something else instead of feeling like someone always has to be this decider of how much space that we get to be?
I think truly understanding that if we know that liberation isn't something that is going to be given to us because it
Yeah.
was taken from us, like our quite literally, especially those of us in Black bodies, it was stripped from us, our
Yeah.
consent, right? And I think a lot of it when we're talking about reproductive justice as well, and we have to think about, the horrors that enslaved Black women endured. It's like the plantation doesn't run without the Black woman producing more property. Like you said, we can't wait for the state to give us anything or the state to do anything. It's like we think about food stamps and things like that. Like I know, if I'm not mistaken, there's like a qualification process you have to go through, a certain amount of income you have to have in order to get those things. It's like with the state, there's always an application process. The state decides if you are qualified enough to get the help that you need, right? Not based on the fact of like you're saying, I'm hungry, my kids are hungry, we need food. Oh, okay, can you fill this out first though? To let us know if like you're actually worthy of having this basic need met. When it comes to reproductive justice in particular, I've always thought a lot, especially growing up in a very religious Christian space and the way it was talked about in church. It was something that was one of the first things to me as a young girl. I was like, this doesn't feel right. If I choose to actually be like, I actually don't want to be a mother at all. And then I think something about even just having that choice is an assertion of your autonomy, right? Because it should be up to the person bearing that child to make that choice. And then, when I think about how enslaved women, that was not a choice they were even given. Like motherhood was a demand. You are going to bear this property so that I can make more money. And if you don't, there's a risk. And so I feel like it's also important to emphasize that when we say like this assertion of autonomy and having this choice and this consent, like there are risks involved with it. Like there is no guarantee that it's all going to work out in the end, but it's important for people to realize that a lot of it does start with you making an active choice saying, I'm actively going to refuse this. And I'm also not going to wait for this because there's a history of this entity not doing anything to help me or those I love. And obviously, when we're thinking about hierarchy and like, going through the state, that's who makes the decisions about your body. So we got to go from the top and then you at the bottom. That's how you know what you are going to do with your body, right? So why do you feel like it's important for people when it comes to kind of start embracing anarchism, even just in their daily life?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is kind of what you've already touched on already, about also this idea of like there being layers to choices that we're making. Like one of my criticisms that I often have when we have just like broader conversations about either abortion or just like motherhood is this idea that also just like access to abortion means people are like able to do choice. Just because like for me, like I don't know if I like want to have children, to be honest, because I think about things like climate collapse. I think about police violence. I think about the fact that so many like younger parents, like part of their realities of raising their children are the reality of like mass shootings. I just think about so many things that, okay, like, yes, I want to have this child, but like now I also have to think about like, how do I keep them safe from these things, or attempt to give them some kind of like stability and healthy household, like in light of these things existing. For me, if I were to become pregnant, like, I don't know, in the next like 6 months, like I definitely would be like, all right, I would like to terminate this pregnancy. Like I have no
Yeah.
desire or capacity to raise a child right now in
Yeah.
particular. Yes, like in that way I would be self-determining and saying, hey, like I don't want to do this, even though particularly right now the federal government is trying to incentivize people to give birth, either
Yeah.
around like population control for white women being like, we need more white babies so that we can, one, even though they're not acknowledging COVID,
Right.
one, like replace the white population that's being taken out by COVID, and two, so that we can have these like Black or brown folks to be laborers in prisons, and also just in low wage work. And so even though I'm like defying the state in that way, there's also this other layer to my choices too, right? Like I'm not necessarily making that choice enthusiastically.
Right.
Like I would like the climate to just not
It's not.
be what's going on right now.
Right.
Like I would like clean water and these other things to be guaranteed. Like I would like mass gun violence to not be part of our reality. Like I would like all those things to also not be factors. And like say maybe all those things are not factors, then maybe I still don't end up having children because I just don't want to at that point.
Mhm.
But at least at that point, then like I do actually have all the resources and things that I need to actually make an autonomous choice and say, hey, like that's actually not the relationship that I want to have to a child. Like maybe I want to be a part of just the act of raising children as like a community member instead of as their, parent in this way. Or even just rethinking like the way that we think about family too. Like I think there's a lot of conversations about family abolition that I think have anarchist values kind of wrapped in them too, as far as not thinking about like parenthood in this like two people are parents and these are like the superior person.
You do what I say. And yeah.
Yeah. And even just this idea that like children are raised by more than just their parents. And we see that all the time, not just, like in cases where the state intervenes and, there's kinship care and things like that. But it's just very normal for multiple generations of people to be involved in raising that child and for children to get to know different adults and different ways of being and learn different things from different adults and even different things from, like siblings. Like, but so much of, I think, the pressures of how the state forces us to engage in reproduction, forces us to work so much is that then siblings end up having to become parents non-consensually because parents have to work and do all these other things and are just trapped in this cycle around capitalism. Or, children don't get to form the kind of bonds that maybe they want to form with other adults in their communities because we have all these ideas about what it means, for to have a parent, to not have a parent, what it means for a household to be functional and productive and all of these other things. I just really think that we're so limited and constrained, and to our detriment when we do fall in line with these systems and do fall in line, even with just the idea of like central authority,
Right.
that we're just like missing so much of each other as humans. But I think also missing so much as far as even just like actually making consensual, intentional choices, even when we feel like we're making choices and I'm like exercising my will. Like, are we making like good choices? Am I making this choice without coercion in some way? And even if it's not like person to person coercion, like to what I was saying about having children, like a partner is not making me, have a child or not have a child, but systemic things are also coercion, even if it's not, an abusive dynamic too. Like that shit still hurts. Like it's still not, pleasant to be like coerced in those ways. And so I think it's just such an opportunity to like really think about the lives that we're living, and the ways that we can be in each other's lives, and I think better ways.
I remember I knew from a very young age I did not want children. And growing up in a Christian household and space, you don't want to be a mother. This is what your life, you should want to be this. And it was like, I was like, whoa. I just like, if you want to be a mom, that's great. And also I learned later on too, the mortality rate for Black women is still very high. But I also, like in a lot of ways, especially when I think about Asada, she was saying, she ultimately still did want to have children. So I feel like there are two sides to that, but ultimately this comes down to what we're saying. It's like an active choice to decide we do or don't want to. And that is completely up to the person. You had this excellent piece that you wrote about a bill that was passed, and you kind of said something to the effect of how like the state it's in your home. It's already informing the way that we will go about making decisions. There was a excellent tweet you had that I'm going to use as a quote because I think it's great. Okay, we use quote tweets in this household. Okay, you said the law is not real. Law only has as much power as people give it. When no power is given to it, it does not exist. Whether the law has power is a matter of what best serves the interests of white supremacy. This is why we need to escalate, not decry unlawful action. Escalate. What do you feel like a stateless life looks like for you?
Something that comes to mind, I think, is about just because like I tend to think about this also in abolitionist spaces where the response to something not existing anymore is like, oh, that means no one has any responsibility for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And, without, people caring about each other, having this sense of like social responsibility, like there would be chaos. Which like really strikes me because in one sense I'm like, what we're living through right now is chaos, objectively.
Right.
There's no, coherence, peace, stability, tranquility. Like this is chaotic, in a negative way.
You're right.
But I also just think about the fact that like a stateless life to me is not actually like the absence of any kind of responsibility or obligation to one another in like a human sense. To me, it invites like deeper forms of responsibility because we're actively saying we want to exist like in contradiction or in opposition to this other thing. Which right now, like we live in a very individualist society where our ultimate responsibility or obligation is actually to the state. Like the state tells us it's to each other, but that's because the state is saying that its interests are yours. Like you care about, law and order, or even just like the messaging that, like I think the Trump administration, like in the flurry of like executive orders that like he signs every day, like I think there's so much there about and very out in the open because I don't think he's like the traditional politician of like trying to coat my language and all kinds of things of where he's like, this is the greatest threat to us. Like we're threatened by the existence of trans people. Like we're threatened by, people resisting genocide and apartheid in Palestine. Like we are threatened by this. And so people, I think very rightfully are very like, oh, we're anti-Trump, we oppose anything Trump says, we feel the opposite way. Like that makes sense to me. But it's also like if we did, like we would be in opposition to the idea of statehood. Because that's what gives statehood coherence. It's us saying, oh, we collectively believe these things. We collectively have bound our fate in the existence of the nation state continuing to exist, regardless of how violent and dissatisfied we are with it. Which like explains a lot of the, I think, like Black Americana stuff right now of trying to make peace like with our captivity in a lot of ways. Because the feeling is like either I can get content with it or I have to be miserable and angry every day.
Yes.
Like there is no like third door. And so to me, the idea of like a stateless life is the third door, is to say like I actually don't have to get comfortable in captivity. I can actually not be captive anymore and reimagine my relationships to other people outside of a state dictating what our relationships are, what my interests are. And then how do we build that and give that to each other? And it'll be trial and error. Like I'm not saying that we all in our minds have like this quiet conditioning that as soon as we get, I don't know, to an island somewhere that it's all just going to kick in and we're going to have this beautiful little society or something. But we have like I just like don't also believe in this idea that we're like inherently selfish, that if the government stopped working tomorrow that we would all just like, I don't know, eat each other or something. Like people like will say like, oh, that's what's going to happen. That's the only thing keeping us.
Right.
I'm like, honestly, no. Like, especially because the government encourages such violence. Like, no, like the government is not why I'm not, causing harm every day. Like I'm choosing not to. Like I actively have no desire to to do these things that you think I'm going to suddenly do if the government doesn't exist. For me, this idea of statelessness is truly about like actively building something else. And like I think people have done like these stateless experiments throughout history. Like I think about my lineage a lot as just being the descendant of the indigenous people from Puerto Rico, and then also just being the descendant of enslaved folks who at some point were in the Carolinas and then said, I'm going to New York, I'm not living here. Even just that idea of like feeling like, okay, like if we have this country that's split in two, I'm going to go to the other one. And so, yes, it's not existing truly like in opposition to this anti-Black settler state, but we've seen people dare to say, I'm going to try and build something else somewhere. And so that, I think, desire just always lives within us. And I think we pass it on to each other. And even now, like, I think we chase this idea of statelessness just because we know that we need it, like, to survive. And so I don't think it's like a primitive instinct in that way, but like, I do think it's it's something really intentional that we can all tap into.
Yeah.
And I hope that more of us do. Like, I understand that it's something new, so you're like, or I could do this thing that I can expect to look like this and run like this for the rest of my life. I don't have to, worry about what it'll look like tomorrow. I kind of know. But I just think that we deserve more than that.
Yeah. I think what you said in particular that really caught me was just how when we talk about carving out something better, there's some people choose to like carve out something within their captivity. So like they still feel like they're in alignment to it rather
Yeah.
than opening that third door. There's a history of Black folk that have actively showed us what it means to be ungovernable, what it means to directly oppose the state. I mean, obviously we think about Asada and like, obviously the Black Liberation Army, freeing her. You think about people like Kawasi Balagoon who escaped prison multiple times, and then I think about the Maroons, obviously. Even now, when I'm thinking about like what this world looks like, it's just more so I know there's no guarantee that I even see it in my lifetime, but that's not going to impede on me actually trying to actually open that third door. It all starts with you and how you show up. When I look in general, when I look at Black people and the different way we show up in this world, when I look at trans people, when I look at people that are femme, people that are mass, it's like these are things that we all embody openly, despite knowing that there is a threat because they see us as a threat. Remember you sent me that pamphlet, I think it was entitled Jane, where it kind of goes through this history of enslaved Black women, still performing procedures, for abortions they have to. It's just like, even that, right? Like it's, these Black women didn't have degrees, but we're still actively going to care for each other in the ways that we know how, also out of necessity. One of the beauty of more people embracing anarchism and really asserting that autonomy is just that other people can look at you that have been indoctrinated by this order and be like, we don't have to do things this way. And I kind of gave some examples as well, but I wanted to know for you personally, what examples of that type of ungovernable life or stateless life have you seen that personally really resonate with you?
I mean, I think about like really small examples. Like, I think a lot about just like, I think there's a lot of things about social media that I really resent actually. But there are also like things about like when you see somebody like, at least for me, like when I follow people, like it usually is very intentional. Like I'll see something about them and be like, I want that for myself. Not in
Mm-hmm.
like a, oh, they are promoting skinny tea, like I too,
Right.
that kind of way. But like I'll like read something from someone or see a way that they're like modeling something that I'm like, ooh, like I want that. Or even in organizing spaces, like I feel like I've had the privilege in quite a few different scenarios to like come into a space fairly new and like untouched by whatever dynamics exist. And can very like quickly identify who the person is who's kind of like pushing, the group a little bit and like challenging their politics. Because usually that person ends up being me, but I like when it's somebody else. When I'm coming into a space that I don't have a lot of context in, because I'm like, who am I to come in here and start, pointing
Right.
things
Yeah,
at
yeah.
people. But like even things like that of someone just being like, I don't like that idea. I think that isn't in alignment with what we said we were trying to do. Or just seeing people be like, yeah, I wore this outside today. People stared at me. People might have called me slurs, but I don't care. This is a fit.
Right.
Like even just little things like that, like it's contagious. Like it makes you be like, wow, I want that. Like there are so many like ideas that I've just encountered on the internet from someone who's not necessarily even posting them to be like, I'm the most right person that has
Right.
ever existed. But it's just like, I felt moved to write today. Here's what I've written. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, I'm gonna stand on this no matter what, but here's an invitation for you to come with me. And I just think there's something about that that is so moving to me, and really like keeps me hopeful when a lot of, I think the critique that I think I have of a lot of reproductive justice organizing is that we like forget that step of inviting people to come with us. It's really nice to see people create space and say, actually, like, I'm going to push back on that. You could always bring people with you, like, figure it out. And if something is keeping you from bringing people with you, then that's what you should be like, I don't want to be involved with that. And versus saying, well, some of you can't come. Well, some
Yeah.
of you need to clear your calendar or you getting left behind.
Yeah. One of the ways in which like I feel like even when I first followed you, because I followed you for a while, and I remember when you followed me back, I was like, oh, pasta. But like I read your work, I saw what you were doing. It's just like this is really important, and that's something I want to do more of. But I realized in order to do that, I got to start embracing that in myself. And I've been thinking a lot about how it is one thing to say no, but how are you actively making sure you're saying yes in other ways? Like, okay, say no. Okay, cool. But like, what are you doing to make sure that yes actually sticks? What are you doing to make sure that yes is actually in practice every single
Yeah.
day? You know, just kind of wanted your thoughts on like when we think about people like Amber Nicole Thurman and Candy Miller, who are women that both in Atlanta who died from abortion complications. And when we think about the preventability of those deaths, because they were preventable deaths, like what do you feel like that says about, you know, the state and kind of how, once again, how we need to be proactive in providing care for one another?
I mean, I think like the emphasis on preventability, I think is really what lands with me, just because a lot of the particularly like maternal deaths that we read about or hear about, even if it's just in a statistic and we don't actually hear individual stories, are preventable. And like even the CDC says that. And so for me, it just like says so much that death is a predictable outcome of the systems that we are seeking healthcare in. Particularly because in the case of Candy Miller in particular, like she was told like your pregnancy could kill you, and then just did not have a safe option for terminating it, just because from being a doula, like one of the times that we don't advise people to use like medication abortion, for example, to terminate a pregnancy, is like, have you ever had an ectopic pregnancy, or are you having one right now? Like really like looking at like the health and viability of the pregnancy, just because we're like, hey, like if you self-manage this, you could be putting yourself at risk of a medical emergency. And like depending on really like not just like how fast, you know, until this becomes a medical emergency, but also how fast like can you actually get to care that will actually be care, versus someone saying, sorry, I can't do this because of
Yeah.
abortion bans, varies depending on where you are. And so I just really often whenever I see these stories or have this calling to learn another name or learn another story or to see how a family is doing or contribute to a GoFundMe, it really just strikes me how like death is a preventable outcome, yes, usually all the time, but also it's a predictable outcome. What else but death will move us to do something else? Particularly because like we learn names at the discretion also of the state in many ways too. Like it's who will cover this, who will report on this,
Yeah, yeah.
what editor will let this reporter publish this, like who will let this person do the relationship work that's necessary for
Yeah,
particularly
good
Black
permission.
folks to trust them with their story and to publish it. Like even just that is also really frustrating to me. Like we truly will not know what the death toll is, like particularly post Roe, but also even before as well. And so we're seeing that the state is producing death and sustained by death. And then also part of doing that is also limiting how we're able to really like keep track of our dead and mourn them as well. And so I just think it's such a way to look at how containment happens. Just because if we were really at the forefront of our mind all the time, thinking that I could die by going to this place, more of us would feel moved to be like, well, what are we doing instead? And then when we, ask that question of what are we doing instead, so many people do have doulas, are, doing home births, are doing these other things. And we see the ways that the state limits that as well with, like cases of CPS, intervening when someone does a home birth and has a midwife taking care of their newborn. But also even with doulas, like right now, there's this pushback against states trying to create these like certification boards for doulas, because the whole point of why doulas are so effective, like, is because we are not embedded in the state. Now a lot of people are not saying that out loud explicitly. They're just like the tradition, and yes, but also like the reason that granny midwife, like even midwifery, like there is something lost by midwifery having certification boards. And the thing that's lost is not, skill, things like that. Like
Right.
you're either a midwife or you're not, but it's the fact that like the state, now I'm a mandated reporter, for example. Like if I'm a doula who's enrolled in Medicaid programs and I get reimbursed by Medicaid for the support I provide, I'm a mandated reporter, which means that I have the obligation to carry out the state's interests in separating families through CPS or whatever it is. While a lot of people are pushing back on the certification, like this started with these Medicaid programs. And that's really hard to sit with, because there's also just this reality of like, well, then how do doulas get paid so that they could, make rent, put food on their table, whatever it is. But also, how do we make sure that doula care is then, accessible to the people who need it most?
Right.
And it's a tension that I struggle with, like even in my individual capacity. Like none of my doula services cost anything, just because like I do abortion support, and I'm like, if you could give me, I don't know, $500 for supporting you, like you would just get a plane ticket and have an abortion in New York and
Yeah.
not have to worry about the law.
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, I just can't square charging when I think about it like that. And so I don't. And so I just have to figure out other ways to make money.
Mm.
Now, that also means I don't, do a full time. Like, I have to obviously take on only a few people so I can just physically be other places making money.
Mm.
Death is a predictable outcome. Like, that means this doesn't work. Okay, let's look at the other things people are doing. How is the state actually a barrier to us also doing other things so that we can arrive at this place where we're critical of the state? Instead of thinking that there's some kind of like compromise to be made with the state. Not like, I think, like misidentifying co-option as collaboration as well,
Mhm.
particularly I think in the maternal health space, because yes, like we are looking at death or something else. And I
Right.
think that is very scary naturally, especially for people who do want to have children, who are like, I need to shift this condition for me to survive childbirth. But we're seeing, I think, the ways that they're encroaching on our alternatives and our anti-state orientation, whether or not we've consciously adopted it.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just really, really critical that we're not responding to trauma by being like, let me seek, solace in the state. Like, let me find a way to coexist with the person who's killing people.
Mm.
Because if it was just a person, we would not be doing that. Like, if we were
Yeah.
talking about a serial killer, y'all would not be like, well, let's see if we could just, he hasn't told me. Like, maybe I can talk to him. Maybe he can hear me out.
Right. Right.
But we do it with the government every day. We're like, well, maybe we just need like a maternal health board. Maybe we just need someone to write a report about all of this death and write a bulleted list of recommendations, and then we can figure it out. Maybe we just need someone to fund a grant where I can do a survey in the community where all of this death is happening, and I can see what they think about all of the death. Then we have all kinds of, well, let me just ask and see and
Yeah.
discuss and committee and whatever it is,
Yeah.
cookout or whatever it is.
Going through other hierarchies to get what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just think we need to move beyond it. And I think that if we're going to continue to kind of, carry other folks' caskets in this way, and really just have these names on our tongues the way that we do, we owe them that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we should just be learning stories for the sake of being able to tell them.
A lot of what you're saying thinks me about how when it comes to embracing anarchy, a lot of it is also realizing that when you do that, that means you also do not need permission. Because we were talking about essentially the procedures that could have been performed, in a case like Amber Nicole Thurman, where like I think the doctors waited, over 20, 30 minutes. If somebody had stepped in and was like, I actually know how to perform this procedure, I will help you. We're not going to wait on, and like I remember you saying, like, we can't wait on doctors with degrees to be radicalized because yes, we realize there is something at stake for them with their state certification, right? And them not being able to, like, there's nuance to that. But I think it's also just like, if somebody had been like, what, come with me, I don't have an office, I don't have my PhD or my degree on my table, but like I know how to do this and I have confidence that I can help you, and I think even when we think about just passing down the way to perform procedures like that in a case where somebody that has the certification can't, at least we know someone who can, and I know something that in Anarchism and the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Camboy Urban, he talks about how, when we think about other ways to provide care for people, that's going to mean it may not be essentially in the dental office or the hospital. Maybe it's your neighbor down the street, maybe it's somebody in another state, somebody from around the way that has the skills, that has the knowledge, and is also willing to perform this care for you, not because we want compensation or care, because like you need it. And as a human being, I want to do what I can to make sure you can have that, So the care we may have in the future, if we're really thinking about alternatives, is not always going to come in the ways that we're used to. This means embracing other ways that care may come for us as well, So like, okay, I'm a doctor, I know how to do this, but like, even though you don't have a degree, I can still teach you this. Like, even not this thing about professionalism getting in the way. Like, no, I think other people should know how to do this, so I'm going to pass this down so you can do it too. And then you give somebody else the confidence to step in.
Because that's what we were doing at first, like, particularly thinking about midwives, like, people were having babies, and then white men were like, I'm an OBGYN, and they were like, girl, what is that? And they were like,
right,
you actually can't do this anymore. Only we can do it. So it's not that, oh, no, every single person who gave birth died before a doctor, which we know is not true, otherwise we would not exist. Like, I kind of am just like, logically, that's not true. I think it's something worth, glancing at for a second, longer, if we're saying that, like, hey, this, like, maternal health crisis only emerges because of professionalization, right? Like, Because really it was like, oh, I'm having a baby, call so-and-so down the street, she delivered me from my mother,
Right.
so I'm gonna have her deliver my baby.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing until
Mm-hmm.
people were like, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
If you do that, you're gonna go to jail. If you do that, so and so's gonna call the police on you. Or like, now it's not safe for me to do it at all, and so I have no choice but to not do it in that way. But again, even with that, we see that like, if we just all say this law doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people talk about that like selectively. They're talking about it with like Luigi Mangione because they're like,
Right.
God, he's fine, so I don't want him to go to jail. Everybody say no, he's not guilty.
Right. Oh, no,
Um,
you're hot. Please don't go to jail.
yeah, but I'm like, okay,
How do
like
you-
if that's what gets y'all to do jury nullification, like I
Right.
don't know.
That, like, I feel like Louis Mangione, for people, like, that's how they became abolitionists. It's just like, no.
Yeah, I was like, if that's what gets you there, I'm
Right.
hoping that once you get there, I can nurture your spirit. But
One of the last quotes I want to go on before we get into the last question is another by Sadia Hartman, from Wayward Lies, Beautiful Experiments. She says, like the flight from the plantation, the escape from slavery, the migration from the South, the rush into the city, or the stroll down Lenox Avenue, choreography was an art, a practice of moving even when there was nowhere else to go, no place left to run. It was an arrangement of the body to elude capture, an effort to make the uninhabitable livable, to escape the confinement of a four-cornered world, a tight, airless room. Tumult, upheaval, flight, it was the articulation of living free, or the very least trying to. It was the way to insist, I am unavailable for servitude, I refuse it. So what are practical ways you think a person can start embracing their autonomy?
for me, like I think it's always easier to like start with a negative and then move into a positive, which sometimes is like hard because sometimes I think it limits imagination. But if like really just like sitting with like what are things that I like say yes to every day that I really don't want to, or that I already can know are like not enthusiastic guesses.
Right.
And
Right.
like, so at first you might be thinking of things that you like might have to do anyway. You might be like, damn, I hate cleaning my shower or something
Mhm.
first, which like, yes, you have to do it. So,
Mhm.
there's not much you can do about that. But you
Right.
can like assess like, why do I hate cleaning my shower? Because I just worked all fucking day.
Mhm.
And I gotta come here and I gotta like make my space livable.
Yeah.
Like I hate that. And can really just start, I think, like negotiating there. And I think like gaining like body literacy from that. Like that has been something that has been really, really impactful for me. And I used to be somebody who was very like these love and light healy people. Like I hate them. I find them obnoxious. I hate you. I don't believe the answer is in herbs. I don't believe that I
Right.
just need to lay in the grass. Like I hate you and you upset me. But some of them like really have like transformed my life and like really have helped me like listen to my body and like learn autonomy that way.
Mhm.
And really just be like, hey, your body doesn't want to sit at a desk. Like actually just like feel the way that your body feels when you are in situations that you do not enthusiastically want to be in. And
Mhm.
like maybe the first step isn't getting yourself out of all of them.
Right.
Maybe the first step isn't like, cool, I quit my job and now I live, in the woods because my body said I want to do that. Like if that is where you go, I love that for you. But I
Right.
know like for me, like that probably isn't where I'm gonna go.
Right.
But like really in starting to just like really feel like what my body rejects has been such a like pathway to that autonomy. And for folks who are like, I can't listen to my body right now, it's gonna yell at me, and I'm not looking forward to facing that at this time. I also hear that too, and I think like other ways too, like I also just have found so much of myself in reading too. Like I think like really actually like sitting down and like doing self-study, there's like so much there. Even things that I've read before, I'll come back to and be like, all right, I'm ready to like really sit down and engage in like true study.
Mhm.
And like read about the ways that people live and read about the ways that people have resented the ways that they've had to live, and being like, okay, like how can I bring that into the things that I do every day?
Mhm.
And like that's like really why I ended up feeling empowered to start like the mutual aid network that I had when the pandemic started, because 5 years before that, like I definitely would have been like, well, guess I just sit on my couch till this is done.
Yeah.
But I really was just like, hey, like I could probably do that. It's very easy to like look at people like on the internet, which like for better or for worse, like for some people I am a person on the internet who does things and like I write things and I feel like they're important enough to share. Like
Mhm.
that was not something that I always felt. Like I often was just like, damn, I'm just taking up space. And like anytime I would like move my body in a certain way or like dare to like breathe in a certain place, like I just felt like why do I have the audacity to do that?
Mhm.
And so much of that is just ways that we deny ourselves autonomy. Like actually one, I just actually don't have to have a reason. I actually can just move and be and take up space and
Mhm.
it not be clean or purposeful or productive, because that's internalized capitalism. but also like maybe I do have audacity to exist. Like maybe that's actually not a bad thing. And like, what do I need to continue to exist and to like nurture this spirit and to feel and to feel like deeply about things instead of finding ways to contain those things or cut off those parts of us. And so even though I think that definitely sounds like woo, like it's not like a concrete here's the 10 things you can
yeah, right, yeah.
It's like truly like has been so much part of my journey of just unlearning like a lot of shame. Like I think we just underestimate how much shame I think either that we carry or just like the ways that the state is invested in making us feel ashamed, because like we just shrink ourselves all the time in the sake of like decorum or whatever it's called. And like there are some things we should just keep as manners and politeness, sure, but like even those things can be reframed not around like shame of my body existing or like taking up space or things that I don't know, but around just like how do I take care of people instead of how do I make myself smaller or make myself uncomfortable for the sake of the greater good. Because that's also I think why people feel so averse to a lot of these concepts is they see it as like, oh, there's nothing for me to gain from that, because they've been told that like I do gain something from the shame and all these other things that I'm holding in the interest of like making sure I'm still clocking in and out of work, making sure that I'm still productive, that I still am always thinking of myself as a means to an end. Like the state has told me there's something about that I'm doing.
Yeah.
But this like mutual aid, like we all cook together, we like farm and stuff. Like I don't see what I'm getting from
our own
that.
chickens, homie.
Yeah, like I get to buy a PS5 at the end after I, work all these hours. There's a transaction happening. What's the transaction happening if I'm not doing that?
Yeah.
Even though to me, I'm like, girl, you ever had a mango?
Yeah.
like, girl, have you ever had a berry? Like there's a transaction there too. Yeah, like I really do think that's like the start of it, like in an individual way. The easy thing to say to everybody is always like, oh, join an organization, or like here's the book, here's the superior book list that will like get your life together.
Yeah.
But I think there's also like I think there's also like a readying of the body and the mind that we have to do as well. Cause like there were times when I would read things and be like, I'm lost in the sauce. Like I respect this person as a Black thinker, but I don't know what this means, what I should do. And truthfully, like it wasn't even anything other than I was like, yeah, I need to like actually be ready and like tap into some things in myself and like really open myself up to this, instead of just being like, all right, cool, just move, just like try and find another like thing to be a cog in, but really like, are you ready to be like involved in the work, like invited into it, like transformed by it, things like that.
Yeah, I think you perfectly answered even the second part of that question as well. I love your mind so much. A lot of times when I think about anarchism, for me, like it is a practice that allows me to fully embrace my humanity and also respect that in other people, knowing that I have an active choice to be in this body the way I want to, and you have an active choice. And I don't believe anyone else should have a say in how you do your thing. You do a lot of work with the Transfuture Collective and the Idea Collective. I know you also have a few workshops that you've done as well. So before we close this thing off, I will, if you want to, like tell people like what are some of like maybe some future workshops you have coming up, or just other things, like whether they can even find resources of reproductive justice as well if somebody wants to get into that more after seeing this.
But Friends Help Friends Have Abortions is my baby. That really, I think, is like memorializing a lot of my journey with anarchism, actually. Just like really this idea that like my friend can help me have an abortion, like my friend can help me do whatever I want. But for me, it like really came from my own experience with sexual violence and being like, am I pregnant? Do I have STD? Like I was just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I really was just like, in being, I guess, like in tune with my body in some ways, was just like, I don't want to call the police. I don't want to go to court about this. I don't want to tell Title IX. Like, I don't want to call my family. Like, I just wish I had a friend who I could just talk to and be like, this happened to me. Help me figure out what I should do. Like, I really just wanted peer support. And so I just like, even though like I did end up going down the path of like, I want to be trained as a doula and be able to provide these services or whatever this is to people, regardless of my relationship to them, there's nothing like exceptional about me that makes me like suited to do that. Like you could do that too if you want, feel called to it. Hey, we're told that like the state is our only recourse for these things, and whatever they're willing to offer us is what we have. And that's not true. Like we can be whatever we need to each other all the time. Leaning into like the politicization of friendship, like I think that just like we need to do that. Like we need to really like be okay with like relationships being political, like the ways that we relate to people are actually evidence of how committed we are to the things that we say we are, right? Like I have questions about people who, you know, claim to have these radical politics but are doing the same things that everybody else is doing as far as like weaponizing systems against each other, who are validating, you know, the foster care system, who are validating victim blaming, whether when it comes to celebrities, everybody becomes an abuse apologist in the end.
Yeah.
And so it's really not like a finger pointing as much as just like a point of self-reflection that we could all do together. But that's really where that training comes from, and what I try to impart on people of like, no one is exceptional. Like you could admire people without making them, you know, like gods and goddesses. Like you could admire people and be like, oh, that's a trait that I would really like to develop in myself. And so I'm gonna, to me, that's like what admiration should look like versus looking at someone and feeling like they're the exclusive member of this elite club of organizers or writers or whoever it is, and no one can ever, you know, do that. I really created it to fundraise for a friend of mine who is navigating intimate partner violence and just like is in need of funds to like rebuild life after that. But I'm also doing because I think there's like a big disconnect as far as like being opposed to something and understanding something. I'm hoping to do a good job as far as helping people really trace this from chattel slavery and like displacing Indigenous folks to where we are now with like fetal personhood, where like embryos have more rights than humans, and also hopefully imparting people with some sense of like wisdom. Don't have to accept that just like, oh, rights are disappearing, I guess I don't have them. Like if you truly believe that you as a human have this right, then you have it no matter what. Then it can't go away. And if it can't go away, like you should move as though you have that right. Since a lot of like what I think keeps people trapped in systems that don't work is like helplessness, is like, if I don't validate this, like what else am I gonna do? Well, if I don't invest in these systems, or I say fine, like there's nothing here for me, like what do I do instead? It's these other things, like you plug in where you fit in, kind of is like how I think about it.
Yeah, like I feel like essentially like when we think about embracing anarchism, this embracement of autonomy, it just means like we don't need leaders, we don't need a president, we don't need a professional vanguard, we just need each other and ourselves, because that's where it starts ultimately. If I believe that I have rights and you have rights, then I'm gonna quite literally act that way, you know. And I'm gonna do what I can to provide that care for someone else because they're a human being and I believe they deserve that. I appreciate you so much, and I can't thank you enough for just taking the time to share all your thoughts and ideas with me and just be in conversation with me. And I'm going to make sure I have links to all of the things. He didn't talk about everything that they do, many things, okay? And I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I had a great time.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
I think the work that you're doing is so important, and like bringing these conversations to people like is the work. Like that's what we need to be doing.
Please, I'll have links to everything in the description box to you guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time with another one.
It's not the destiny.